Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Ave Maria Press Professional Development Webinar Series. In today's webinar, Scott Boyle will share new insights and practical ways to catalyze youth and young adults today. My name is Erin Pierce. I am the Parish and Curriculum Marketing Specialist at Ave Maria Press. I would like to recognize our webinar partners, the National Conference for Catechetical Leadership, the National Association of Catholic Family Life Ministers, the National Association for Lay Ministry, and the Catholic Campus Ministry Association. Everyone in the audience is muted today, but you are able to ask questions. Questions can be submitted in the question section here of the GoToWebinar panel, and I will ask as many of those questions as possible at the end of the presentation today. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to you tomorrow via email. With that, I would like to welcome and introduce our presenter today. Originally from Cincinnati, Ohio, Scott received his undergraduate degree in theology from Notre Dame in 2012 and his MA in theology from Notre Dame in 2015, where he was a member of the ECHO Faith Formation Leadership Program. After working in many diverse settings from parish to high school and now the university setting, Scott is passionate about accompanying others as they discern how God is moving in their lives. In addition to his primary work at Notre Dame, each year he travels across the country speaking to different groups about the intersection of theology and lived faith, specifically in the realms of faith formation and youth engagement. Scott, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Erin. It's great to be here.
Yes, I'm going to go ahead and make you the presenter here. So we will see your screen.
Okay, perfect. Hopefully
Wonderful.
that's
See it?
coming
Yep.
through okay for
Okay.
everybody. Yeah, perfect.
Awesome. Can take it over.
All right. Well, first of all, I just want to say a big thank you to Erin for helping me prepare for today, and a big thank you and hello to all of you who are taking the time, whether it's now live here in person or taking the time perhaps in another day and time, perhaps from the comfort of your own home, to watch this webinar and to listen in. I am so grateful for that. And I just want to say thank you for the work that you are doing on behalf of youth and young adults, whatever that may look like in your particular context. I'd like to just share a little bit more about myself and a little bit of the context from which I'm coming from, and I'm grateful to Erin for the introduction. So I now work in what's called the McGrath Institute for Church Life at the University of Notre Dame, and I'm sure some of you are familiar with the McGrath Institute, but for those of you who are not, our institute and kind of my hope today in what I'm going to be sharing with all of you is to connect the resources of Notre Dame and to put those resources at the service of the wider church. I view our work, and I hope my work is like a catalyst, right? Or if we want to use an image, perhaps like a sourdough starter, which would be a more pandemic-friendly kind of image that perhaps some of you are more familiar with. So the McGrath Institute, we're interested in facilitating programs, courses, and research with the goal of supporting you. And we can only do that through deep listening and collaboration. And that's the spirit that's animating my presentation and what I'm hoping to share with you. And I do want to just focus then a little bit more on why I'm looking at animating high school youth and young adults, specifically up to the age of 30. So primarily speaking, these are the communities that I work with day in and day out. So I have a couple pictures here that kind of show a little bit of my work. One of my primary responsibilities in McGrath is to work with the Notre Dame Vision program. So we help to train and form college students from our tri-campus community here at Notre Dame to accompany high school students over the course of the summer, leading them deeper into their faith and an exploration of God's call for them. And believe it or not, I was actually one of those students when I was in college. And I've been involved now with the program for about 10 years now, 5 serving more in a professional context. And it's been one of those programs where I've gotten to see up close and personal the real intersection and the real dynamism between, high schoolers, which I get to see in the context of every summer, and then really working closely alongside our college student young adults on a pretty consistent basis. I've learned so much, and I'm still learning more about the things that animate them, but also some of the obstacles and challenges, which I want to talk a little bit about today. And the other role that I want to highlight is my role with our ECHO program. So I serve as an associate director of recruitment and formation, which, as my title would suggest, means that I'm in charge of kind of overseeing the process and walking with those students who are thinking about ECHO as a next step. So ECHO is a graduate service learning program where we offer young adults, college graduates who are young adults between 20 to 30. Usually we offer them the opportunity to study for their MA in theology through Notre Dame. And then we place them in a partner diocese where they get to serve in a parish or a school. And then we also do kind of integrative formation and comprehensive formation with them to not only help them, grow in their, kind of professional capacities, but grow in holiness, grow in their understanding of God. And so, each year I get to talk with hundreds of students really from all across the country and to listen to their stories. And I'm really privileged that they share those stories with me. So a lot of that experience is coming and animating what I want to do today. You'll hear that word animate a lot. But the final thing that I want to share, and I hope this gives some real grounding, and I'm happy to kind of build on this too, and hopefully, especially when we get to the question and answer program, or part of the program, is the real inspiration for even doing this webinar and speaking to you was and is the conversations that I've been having over the course of the past few months with people like you from all across the country. A few months ago, really, I was starting to feel some of the challenges and the weight of this COVID pandemic. And I was thinking to myself that I could really use some additional help and support in my work to just kind of catalyze and nourish my brain to kind of think about, okay, where could I be focusing? What were some things that I could be really doing to work with these particular communities, especially within Vision and Echo. So I started out actually by reaching out to Newman centers and Newman center directors, and this contact list of about 450 actually turns out contained folks from pastors, DREs, volunteers, teachers who were involved not just at the college level in these Newman centers, but pastors who oversaw parishes and people who worked in youth ministry and a parent and some young adult folks who oversaw young adult ministries. And all in all, I was able to speak to about 70 folks who are doing this type of work. I got as far west as Hawaii to the East Coast. I talked to somebody in Canada, and then folks as far down as Texas, in a variety of different contexts and ministry opportunities. And that was really nourishing for me. So this webinar, quite simply, what I want to do is not only trace my own work and my own story, but these stories and these witnesses that I've heard. And what this webinar is going to focus on is really what I came to see. And, this is sort of an overarching, a bit of a 20,000 foot view with some real particulars kind of put in as well. But two real opportunities that I saw to meet youth and young adults, to meet these young people and to catalyze and animate their faith. And, I know that, right now we are still in the midst of, some many sobering realities. First of all, with the COVID pandemic. And secondly, in the midst of the real challenges of our that we find, within our church right now, and the struggles that we're living into in terms of, evangelization and credibility, which I'm going to, talk a little bit more about here in a moment. But I want to just return to the fact that the goal of today is to leave this webinar with reasons to hope. And I promise you, there are reasons to hope. You get to see them, I know, day in and day out. And in my work and in my conversations that I've had, I can promise you that there are reasons to hope. And that's what I want to focus on. And I also want to focus on the hope that already exists and is moving in and through you, through your hands and feet right now, in the work that you're doing to serve your parish communities and perhaps whatever other ministry context that you work in. I'm aware that I won't get to cover everything today, but I'm hoping that if there's something that I miss, follow up with me. I'd love to have a conversation, after the webinar, or ask a question. I hope that in some way this is the beginning of a conversation, because as I heard in these conversations, it's so good when we can talk with one another and reach out and collaborate. So I hope this can be the beginning of that conversation. So, we could all probably give our own presentations about the landscape that we see in our own ministry context, the challenges and the obstacles that we see in our work with young people. But I do want to just briefly not plant, that would be a lot of planting, but paint the landscape a little bit for us, just to give us some context for not only the challenges, but also the potential fruit of the particular opportunities and responses. So I want to begin by sharing a statistic that I know that I'll return to every once in a while, just to sort of capture the real urgency of this and moment that we have to really focus in on youth and young adult formation. And I'd like to go to, and perhaps you're familiar with Professor Christian Smith, who's actually a sociologist from Notre Dame, who has done extensive writing and research in the religious habits of youth. And I'm sure many of you have seen the quote, but if you haven't, I think this is a really kind of stark reminder of some of the context that we're working in, some of the challenges. That fully 1/2 of youth who self-identified as Catholic teenagers no longer identified as Catholics 10 years later in their 20s. And this came from a multi-year study that Christian Smith and his colleagues did in the research and habits of many different youth and religious practices of youth. But he was able in a follow-up study to kind of zero in on the practices of adults, or excuse me, of youth and young adults. And I don't know about you, but this kind of statistic makes, my ears perk up. And in having these conversations and kind of looking at my own work, I think I've been able to sort of think about for myself and identify 4, I think, key areas that are challenges and obstacles for our youth right now. And I want to cover those just briefly. One is a lack of credibility in the church. I think many people, and kind of hearing the stories, they struggle to trust the church. The news of financial scandals and clergy abuse, among other things, have robbed the church of the moral authority or the credibility that they might have otherwise been more inclined to give it. There is this, even in the midst of the good that is still happening and the things that you're doing and the things that our colleagues are doing across the country, right? There's still so much good that's happening, but there is a perceived disparity between what the church is preaching and, its actual lived practice. And I think a lot of this too is related to the ease of information sharing. We can log on to Twitter or Facebook or, kind of whatever, kind of the platform, right? And the news stories are hitting us, right? And what does the news like to do? Well, they get to the conflicts, right? They get to the stories of the bad actors, and those stories kind of proliferate. And what starts to happen is that dominates sort of the cultural consciousness, which our youth and young adults who are quite adept at social media, and in a lot of cases are using their screens, their devices to get access to news. This is what they're seeing. And then slowly, what surely starts to happen is that the good news of the church starts to get pushed farther and farther, kind of off to the side. And this creates, kind of this, slowly but surely there's this distancing that starts to happen, and they're not, for example, inspired to want to look more closely at the real beauty and the richness that is contained there. So that's number one. Secondly, and kind of related to it, is this idea of societal polarity, right? And we can look at modern society right now in a lot of ways, and kind of the narratives that get proclaimed, and to look at the church's doctrines as, and folks sort of see the church's doctrines as out of date, right? And to look at those as well, and to sort of see these narratives that compete in the public and political arenas, where it's hard to even parse out like what is actually true anyway. Right, you have all these different authorities that are proposing kind of their own version of kind of what happened, and things are sort of being shared, and news or what is reported as news is shared to get a desired result, and its relationship to truth, and this sort of cacophony of narratives, and this polarity of just trying to get in front of people's eyes and attention makes it harder to sort of say, okay, well, if the church is trying to proclaim itself, or to sort of share truth, where does that fit in when there's so many different narratives that are competing for that? So it's a deep challenge there, I think, as well. Thirdly is the throwaway culture. And I probably don't need to talk too much about this, but don't like what you have, you can get something new, right? You don't have to invest in fixing something when something new or better is just within reach. There's no need to wait longer than 2 days. A better thing is just a click away on Amazon. And I'm guilty of this too. But what starts to happen when our imaginations are formed in this way, when we can just click on something and the next few days it's on our doorstep? Well, this kind of idea of sitting or waiting with things that perhaps are broken or incomplete or can't be rectified with the push of a button. How do we start to deal with those things? Maybe it kind of atrophies in our own imagination to be able to sit with those things, right? Because we're so used to clicking on something being there instantaneously to, maybe it's to, give us that good feeling and things like that. And then what happens there? Then the imagination to sort of say, well, let me think about what the church is trying to, to offer us, to, even this idea of, of going to mass. Well, what's that going to do for me? It's this type of imagination that starts to kind of atrophy that openness and that potential, right, for kind of religious formation. And then finally, I think there's this idea of the grass is always greener. Our youth and young adults are bombarded constantly by counter proposals of, what a good life looks like, or what will make them happy. We hear, on our social media, nail this perfect look, go to this high school, college, get this certain job, get married at a certain age. All of these different narratives that I know the young people that you work with, they hear this. And it's like, when you've achieved these things, then you will have arrived. These are the narratives that they glow tantalizingly in our social media, in our feeds, in our movies, in our ads. Where's there room for these places of wonder? When we hear so much that these other things are what we should be aiming for, where's there room to hear the narrative that God desires them, that they should be aiming for heaven? Becomes a little bit a little bit trickier to see. And I think the final point, and to go back to Christian Smith, he says, he kind of sums it up, like, what is this sort of cultural, this kind of milieu, what are all of these different kind of trends contributing to? Well, they contribute to kind of a caricatured understanding of religion on behalf of youth. And in his research, he kind of summarized that overall caricature that he saw on behalf of youth, that they viewed religion as something that existed to make them feel good, that it helped them to make good choices, it helped them to resolve problems and troubles, and that it served their felt needs. So rather than a faith that actually calls something out of our young people, calls us out of ourselves toward holiness, the narrative is reversed. The church almost becomes like another product that is meant, at least in this kind of modern imagination, that it's meant to serve our own needs. You can see that could create a little bit of a challenge. So, okay, all that said, I said I wasn't going to focus on that for that long. But I want to use this as kind of a trampoline, a jumping off point. And especially as we're now in this season of Advent, if we're thinking about, welcoming, preparing our hearts to welcome the Christ child at Christmas, it might seem like the ends of our minds and hearts, the ends and the minds and hearts of our young people are too full of this other stuff, especially now with COVID, now that that's added another layer. But what if this was actually a moment of opportunity? And that's actually what Pope Francis is pointing us toward. And I'd like to share an excerpt with you that really caught my attention. Maybe some of you saw it as well. It appeared in the New York Times. It was an excerpt from his book, Let Us Dream: The Path to a Better Future. And this is what I want us to remember as we head into the webinar today. This is going to be the arc of where we're going to be thinking and going. He says this is an excerpt from the book, but also the article. There's a line in Frederick Hoderline's Hyperion that speaks to me. This is Pope Francis talking about how the danger that threatens in a crisis is never total. There's always a way out. Where the danger is, also grows the saving power. That's the genius in the human story. There's always a way to escape destruction. Where humankind has to act is precisely there, in the threat itself. That's where the door opens. This is a moment to dream big, to rethink our priorities, what we value, what we want, what we seek, and to commit to act in our daily life on what we have dreamed of. God asks us to dare to create something new. This is what I want us to think about and to open our minds and hearts toward, and this is what I was trying to do in preparing for this webinar, to try and catalyze and dare to create something new and to commit to those things in our daily lives, in our ministries, with our colleagues, with our families. And here's the exciting thing too. If there's anything that my work and these conversations with leaders and different representatives of these youth and young adult communities, it's that if anybody is primed for this, it's our youth and young adults. The saving power is already there, moving within them. And I want to talk about and now hit on those two prime opportunities that I saw and share those with you with some stories and a little bit of context. Opportunity number one, here we go. Love thy neighbor, cultivating structures and habits for service and mission. So in that same article, Pope Francis has another little tidbit that I'd like us to focus on. He says this: if we are going to come out of this crisis less selfish than when we went in, we have to let ourselves be touched by others' pain. We cannot return to the false securities of the political and economic systems we had before the crisis. We need to slow down, to take stock, and design better ways of living together on this earth. And this is where I heard a very concrete open door. The one thing that held most consistently through all of these different dioceses, schools, contexts, these conversations, these ministries with young people, it's that our young people are willing to let themselves be touched by others' pain. They're deeply inspired by hearing stories of people making a difference or giving their lives in service and reaching out. Perhaps you know this even better due to your work with young people. They're optimistic. They want to be a part of dreaming better solutions. And I don't think we could have any better example from the popular context than perhaps something that you're familiar with or you saw at the beginning of the pandemic. John Krasinski's Some Good News. For those of you that caught it or even want to think back that far, wow, it seems like such a long time ago. Just as a reminder, it came out right as the reality of the pandemic was setting in. And John Krasinski's whole goal in creating this show was that he wanted to counteract all of the bad news that we just kept hearing day after day. And the whole design of this show was that he was only going to air good news. He was going to, get short clips and have celebrities come on and highlight the big and small acts that people were doing for one another. What an idea, right? It took a pandemic, right? But the outreach and the sort of attention that this got and the popularity that this got, it went bonkers, especially among youth and young adults across the board. I mean, I saw it here at Notre Dame with my students. I mean, they were sharing, they were, quoting things and things like that. Like they were responding as well. Like you saw, you started to see all of the ways in which other people were embracing this spirit. They were inspired to create their own videos, do their own acts of service, look out for other people in their own communities. It seemed to just capture this whole spirit and revolution of kindness. And it only took a pandemic, right, for everybody to sort of focus in, and was really forced in a lot of ways, if we were going to make it through this together, forced to focus on other people's needs, but also to see the way in which that animated the spirit of the world, but especially youth and young adults. I think there's an opportunity there, especially because, well, the church has been talking about the power of this, right, for 2,000 years, right? To sort of say this fundamental inclination, right, that has clearly been tapped into, that clearly has the ability to resonate and move people. What if we were to use that? What if we were to use that to invite people into the church's story, the church's mission? This is what Pope Francis says, right? Kind of drawing all of this together again from that same article. Our lives are a gift, and we grow by giving of ourselves, not preserving ourselves, but losing ourselves in service. So there could be some potential here, right? To sort of take this animation, this spirit, this openness, and to infuse it perhaps in our communities for the sake of inviting people deeper into their story, perhaps the church's story. So let me just give you one example that I want to highlight. A few weeks ago, as a part of these conversations, I spoke with Rick Mazet, or Maz, as he's known more affectionately by his students. He is the rector, or the one in charge of overseeing Fisher Hall, which is a men's dorm here on campus. He's many things all in one: the CEO, the chief pastor, the disciplinarian, the father figure, and other things for these guys. And they clearly look up to him. And I just want to share a little bit of his story, because he's been setting those kinds of foundations, this kind of outward focused, service-oriented mission, and capitalizing on his own residents' hunger to think beyond their own needs. So what does that look like in Fisher? For the past few years, he's been facilitating a tutoring partnership between his dorm community and a local school here in town called St. Adalbert's. St. Adalbert's has been in need of extra hands to support their students learning outside of the classroom. And for Maz, it was an easy sell. Fisher, like the broader Notre Dame community, is full of students who are passionate about many different subject areas. And they're easily able, without much preparation, to cover a wide range of subjects that are going to be central to a first through eighth grade education. These students, these guys especially, Maz told me, they love getting to hang out with the kids. And in a normal non-COVID year, this is just one of the many activities that Fisher is doing as a community. It's a pretty vibrant and active dorm. And, Maz didn't think, kind of much, about the fact that, he had a lot of guys sign up and things like that. But what he didn't realize was how central this ministry, this act of service was for his community. So when the COVID precautions were first put in place here at Notre Dame, there was, as you might imagine, like your own communities, a lot of scrambling to sort of see what would still be possible. And Maz told me that in Fisher, his guys, they'd come knock on his door. They weren't knocking concerned about, their section sports or their dorm dances. They wanted to make sure that they could still tutor. They wanted to make sure that they could still support this community. And it floored him. He was like, this is amazing. And he was happy to report that his guys were able to sort of adjust and make the kind of adjustments that needed to happen to meet with the students on Zoom. So for Maz, it was setting these types of foundations that got them thinking, and in his own words, he thinks opens his guys not only to the service to the wider community, but also being better community members as brothers, taking care of one another, and also animating their own faith, their own response to God. Like, it's made them more serious about the practices that they do to take space to reflect. For example, Maz hosts a regular Tuesday rosary, and this year, the numbers apparently have been up. Like, guys, even in a normal year, they come and they share their stories, they share their faith, they're open to one another. Now, I don't share all of this to suggest that Fisher does this perfectly, and Maz would be the first to admit that, but to offer the suggestion that powerful things can happen when a community, when their habits and their commitments begin with this type of mission. Like, it can and it does shape imaginations. I think this is a prime opportunity then for us as a church to think about, and in our own context, in our parishes, with our young people, how can we speak to this fundamental, this inclination, and how can we help them see that is connected inherently to what the church is all about, to begin to see the church for what it is, and to help people see the church, and to maybe restore some of that credibility as well. So to that end, I wanted to propose 3 principles that I think would be helpful, kind of drawing together a lot of different stories that would be helpful for integrating this sense of mission in your own ministry and work. 1, identify a concrete need or needs and commit to it. So Maz found that in his community, tutoring was a big need. And so when the need presented itself, he jumped on it. So your context in your parishes and faith communities will almost certainly be different. But if you're looking for a good place to start or brainstorm, and this is something that I use in working with our young people at Notre Dame, is the works of mercy. Like, there's no clearer blueprint for this act of taking care of our neighbors, our brothers and sisters, than the works of mercy. Number 2, capitalize on the gifts of your community. For Maz, it was his guys at Notre Dame who were hungry and excited about all of these different subjects. So as you're thinking about planning these things, don't feel like you need to have it all figured out for itself. And invite your young people to help you and to brainstorm and to really kind of hear what they're passionate about, and then follow where that leads. You as leader, or your staffs or your volunteers, can help young people kind of figure that out, figure out the necessary steps that are gonna be that are going to be helpful for kind of making this come to fruition. And then finally, I think we have to make it easier. Sorry, we got to go back here. We've got to make it easier for people to be good. And this is a phrase from servant of God, Dorothy Day. We know the potential. We know where we can get our youth and young adults to. We've got to make sure that they can be invested. So, and if these kinds of habits or structures aren't maybe a normal part of your community or your ministry, don't worry. But I think it's best to start small, to kind of build the habits and the practices, right? Like, for example, thinking about a concrete or manageable time frame that you can use to maybe begin to introduce these habits, right? Seasons like we're in right now, like Advent or Lent, I find are really good times. And just like kind of building a muscle, you can use these seasons, you can use these set time periods to help kind of build momentum a little bit. Nothing kills a good habit quicker than, biting off more you can chew in the beginning, or the discouragement that sets in if people are overwhelmed trying to do too much right away. Finally, I am aware of how much we're all juggling in our communities, and especially how much you're juggling in your parishes. Things are busy for your students, your families, your young adults. I think there's an opportunity to try and figure out how we can build some of these practices. And maybe they're even smaller. Maybe it's something you can do in a week or a weekend, but bringing it into our regular structures where we're already meeting and seeing our young people, our youth and young adults. Finally, also think about, and because the family, right, is so, we know the parents are the primary catechists of their children. Think about ways to involve the family, maybe giving giving a broader project for your youth ministry families or young families in your parish, and brainstorming ideas and ways in which they can commit, and guiding them in that. Okay, great. That was a lot to digest. Here we are with opportunity number 2. And this is the final opportunity that I want to talk about. Go therefore and make disciples. I want to talk about cultivating intentional space and relationships with youth and young adults. There is another clear and resounding sign of hope, on par with the importance of mission and service. And that is the influence of committed and caring adults and mentors in the lives of young people. I could fill, honestly, countless bookshelves, probably libraries, with the amount of stories that have been told to me about the impact of various teachers, parents, pastors, youth ministers, volunteers, you name it. Many of the conversations and some of the stories that have come over the course of the past weeks have highlighted young people who've shared and shared firsthand about the impact of adult mentors, of mentors in general in their lives, whether it was a fun classroom where it was cool to learn the sacrifices needed to create a stable home, a listening ear, tough love. What defined these stories and what they had in common was actually the same, that adults and mentors making real commitments to young people, creating spaces where they had the opportunity to see and test out and discover the people that God was calling them to be. Those types of real commitments made a difference. So before telling you a story of my own, I'd like you all to just be the storytellers with me for a moment. And I'm not going to ask you to unmute yourself. This will be a personal exercise. And I'm going to borrow, just for a moment, you already got a little preview, but a space and a page from Mr. Rogers' playbook. And yes, I mean this Mr. Rogers, the old friendly television neighbor who in 1997, perhaps some of you have seen this, accepted the Emmy for his lifetime of work. And he used a portion of his speech to invite his audience to remember, and I quote, the special ones who have loved them into being. I'd like to invite you just to take 10 seconds with me to think of somebody special, someone whose love and commitment has created a space for you to discover who God is calling you to be. I'll watch the time. Thank you. And we give thanks today for these men and women, for those who are living and those who are now among the communion of saints. We are thankful for the seeds that they have planted in this community, for all that has grown and for all that will continue to grow. Let's listen one final time to Christian Smith. If adults want youth to embrace and carry on their religious traditions, they need first to be clear about their own commitments and convictions, and then take that to youth, no holds barred. If perhaps this exercise, our own memories, are any indication, perhaps now we can even see in that just 10 seconds how important these real types of convictions and commitments can be for us, for our staffs, for our volunteers, to go to youth, to bring those kinds of things. It is here in which we see another, I think, potential for that saving power that Pope Francis talks about. One final story. When I was preparing for all of this, I thought about one of my mentors, Mr. Uzel, who was the campus minister at my high school, St. Xavier, St. X, in my hometown of Cincinnati. And the more that I thought about him, the more I thought, boy, he did all of this well. And before I tell you more about him, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about myself for context. And maybe this has already become clear from listening to me for the past 40 minutes or so. I was the kid who had a lot of questions, fundamental questions, questions like, why should I believe? Why? Who is God? Why God? How do I know what to do with my life? I, as you might imagine, was a lot. And religion, Mr. Uzel was my religion teacher my sophomore year when those types of questions were really starting to hit me. So he was the one that got them. But it was the conviction and commitment that he brought to me and my classmates. And this conviction and commitment was that he wasn't afraid of these questions. And in fact, he encouraged them. He encouraged a space where we could bring ourselves to work out some of these, to be honest, quite fundamental things that we were thinking about, as much as sophomore boys could be thinking about these things. And he made a point to say that he was open to chatting more if we wanted to. And, well, I eventually took him up on that. He had this amazing ability to listen and be present, not to mention a very keen intellect. And this was on display in the classroom, but was really clear when you had him one-on-one. After I'd get done philosophizing or asking a question or sharing something that was on my heart, he'd typically remain silent for a while and then begin with some version of, that reminds me of, and then he'd go on to share something. He'd point me to something from the tradition, maybe it was a story or a quote or an idea, and he'd say, think it over. Sometimes he'd share a funny joke, and which always seemed to have a point and would make me think too, and sometimes we just would hang out. And these are the things that really caught me, that he never devalued the questions or the curiosities that I brought, but had this unique gift to broaden my context, to gently kind of push me beyond what I could see in that moment. And he lived that truth that, if myself or my friends were going to make any progress in our own development, on our own journey of faith, he couldn't do it for us. We'd have to really wrestle with the questions and with God ourselves. So I can, look back and see how this initial invitation and all these subsequent conversations really planted that seed for my own journey, the way that I wanted to live it out as a person, and now the way that I'm trying to live it out as a professional minister. He showed me that some of the most important parts of walking with others in faith, and this is its real potential, is letting them bring themselves. And for us as ministers, or for those that we work with, to meet our youth on their terms, but not to leave them there, but to give, and he did this so well, to help them articulate their own story, to help them realize how God might be calling them to live it. He showed me that, faith could be joyful and that the ins and outs of the tradition were rich and had, real things to say to me in my life. And those seeds that were planted then continue to blossom now. So a lot of his witness has sort of intersected with some of these other observations and conversations. So I'd like to share two more things to kind of close us out today that I think will be helpful in terms of guiding our approach to the young people that we work with. One, meet them where they are, but create space for them to grow. As I was saying, if there's something Mr. Yazell modeled so well for me, it was this. He took my questions, as misguided or imprecise as they might have been, and encouraged me to keep thinking. And he didn't just let me, though, go all over the place, right? He pointed me to the richness of, for example, the church, or perhaps another story. He stoked my curiosity, encouraging me to wrestle with my own assumptions and maybe my own even understandings at the time, to seek further knowledge, to seek further truth, to seek further understanding, even amidst complexity. He was inviting me to see my own views from different angles, especially when it came to the church. And he helped me to see, I think, more than that, like that the church's witness, that even a more nuanced and even intellectual understanding of the faith, it wasn't some sort of abstract concept, but could be a road for understanding the deepest parts of ourselves. I think one of the great challenges that I've seen as I've been engaged in this work is the ability of our young people to engage complexity and unmet expectations, especially when it comes to kind of those deep parts of themselves that perhaps, as we talked about near the beginning of this webinar, that they may keep hidden amid, seeing these other narratives and happy and glamorous social media posts. I think when the rubber hits the road, it's become clear to me how much intentional outreach from adults, or creating that space for youth and young adults to kind of, they need the space to kind of cultivate the kind of hope and patience and commitment necessary to meet those challenges, but also the positive spaces as well. And again, as he modeled, when we create that type of space for young people to engage these questions, these opportunities, these anxieties, they perhaps don't begin to see them, especially the challenges, as obstacles, but then opportunities. And with that kind of patient work, they can develop that kind of disposition to see new possibilities of where the Spirit is leading, even amidst obstacles and challenges. And the second thing, this I've really come to see recently, is this idea of transitions, and I think a deeper necessity for support during transitions. Over the course of graduating high school and going on to college, and then getting jobs and things like that, Mr. Yazell always made himself available to me for conversations and meetups, and his perspective was, I think, really stabilizing, and that kind of disposition and patient disposition that he had with me to kind of keep me grounded in the midst of challenging moments, but also getting to rejoice with him in the joyful moments. And as somebody who sees a lot of young adults and youth in various moments of transition, I think one of the moments where that creates difficulties and where we really have the potential to really lose people is in the midst of those transitions from high school to college to post-college. Moving to a new place can kind of be a shock to the system and upset even the most consistent of routines and faith practices. Hearing these stories consistently, I've talked with many ministers who want to do a better job here, but the challenges are real, right? We have time constraints, and we have the regular young people that we care for on a daily basis. It's difficult to kind of maintain those relationships. And I found, a few creative solutions at different levels. So St. Mary's Catholic Campus Ministry at Stephen F. Austin State University started what they called an Emmaus project. So they actually solicit adult volunteers and pair them up with students who are thinking about different professions. And these adults actually walk with these students and these young people as they, navigate these questions and transitions and look ahead to choosing a career and living out their faith post college. And another parish leader that I know and got the chance to talk to uses the breaks to re-engage her college students who've graduated, and as they return home, she finds ways to integrate them back into programming that's already going on. So Bible studies, service projects, and this gives her moments for her to check in with them, to kind of get a temperature check in the midst of, many of them have already made the transition, but providing further support if they need that. And also, I think for our older young people, for our young adults, I think moments, especially related to the sacrament of marriage and baptisms, these sacraments which are liminal moments of transition in terms of two people coming together, bringing another life in the world, for especially parish communities to check in with their young people, obviously to give them the richness of what the church is talking about, and invite them deeper into kind of what this sacrament needs for them and their choices and their yes to their families, but also to I think in a very practical way, begin to establish and even from there maintain those kinds of relationships, check in because of those moments of formation. So to end, I'd like to just call us back. It's almost kind of in a prayerful way to think about this moment, to once again, and hopefully in some way this webinar has catalyzed a little bit for you, or maybe helped you to dream or think a little bit, and maybe even to rethink priorities. But no matter what, to focus in on what the Pope is saying, what we value, what we seek, what we want. And as a final charge, and be happy to talk to you more about this either in the questions or after. What are the things that we can commit to in our daily lives, in our ministry? What perhaps might this moment elicit within us to go after those dreams, those things that maybe we've been thinking about doing with our young people, with our youth and young adults, but haven't done so? This, as Pope Francis reminds us, is a moment for that. So I just want to conclude by saying once again a thank you. And Aaron, I'll turn it back over to you if there are any questions that are in the chat. I have not looked at those. So
Scott, thank you so much. I really appreciate you highlighting these opportunities for us, and then really giving us the principles to guide us to make this, a reality in our daily ministries. And your goal at the beginning was to give hope, and I'm certainly feeling that hope right now. So thank you so much.
very
Do you
good.
want to advance your slide one more time to your
I'm
email
so
address?
I'm so sorry. Yep.
That's okay.
We had a few moments where where I got a little trigger happy. So
No, your enthusiasm was very engaging. So I just wanted people to see this if they wanted. And I do want to say that Scott is going to share the PowerPoint with us. So I will make reference to that in the email that you will all see tomorrow. At this point, then, I'm going to go ahead and take back presenter mode and invite you to send in any questions for Scott. I've already got some coming in here. So give me 1 minute. Okay. Here's a question. I hear you speaking mostly about building relationships, infusing those relationships with the truth as the relationship grows. How do you get around the safe environment guidelines with adults working with youth and underage? Sorry, I just moved my cursor. And the need for everyone working with young people needing to be trained and cleared through the diocese.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think really gets at, which is quite one of the very practical things about this, right, is that we know, given some of the things that that have gone on in the church, that we need to attend to these things. So I would say right now, you know with a, with everything that's going on, a lot of our interactions have come through Zoom. And thinking about, I think one of the things that's been really helpful for me to think about is, as we think about these kinds of, like, our relationships with youth don't need to just be singular between us and that particular youth, if that makes sense. So to sort of to involve the families, to involve, I know some ministry communities are, they're taking precautions and things like that to meet in person, with masks and socially distance. So I think one of the things, especially right now, and that I think animates this, and especially with this idea of mission, right? This idea of opening ourselves to thinking about the needs of our brothers and sisters, is to kind of thinking about, especially in this context, like doing it more in these types of community settings. Like, our young people are, it doesn't always necessarily need to be kind of a one-on-one relationship. I know, kind of, when I was talking about Mr. Uzel, there would be these moments where hanging out in an office, or things like that. But our young people are watching us and our witness by the very opportunities that we create, by the very way that we invite the members of our community, and things like that. So I think for me, it's actually, I think one of the things that's helpful for me to think about is that, and a lot of times, and maybe I could have made this a little clearer, like, we plant seeds, right? That, maybe we're not even going to hear from a young person. It might, in fact, create the space for them to approach us later, but we might not see it in the exact moment. So, this is where I really trust this, this kind of idea from, from 1 Corinthians, I think it's chapter 3, that, it's God that's causing the growth. It's like, to attend to the things that we need to attend to, kind of these important safety measures that we need to work on, and to let, kind of the spirit and that creativity animate our youth, and bring them to us. So.
Yes, thank you. I have a question here about, especially it's the middle, or the younger ones, the middle school children that are having the
Uh-huh.
biggest challenge, right? They've been
Hmm.
removed from their community, with virtual learning, kind of unsure how to pull them in to identify their beliefs and needs.
Mm. Yeah, that's a that's a really great question. I think one of the things, I've done a lot of speaking for middle school youth. And I think one of the biggest things that I see, with them, is that they especially, I think, they're at this really critical moment of kind of, what I would say, learning to kind of tell their own stories, and they're learning better, like, how to relate to one another, guys and girls. The crushes are starting to happen, kind of all of those things. And I think they're actually at a critical age where this, like, they're very formable, like, to sort of pay attention to, kind of their interests and their gifts and talents. And like, I find that they really respond to, um, like concrete projects, or like, they're still at a pretty tangible age. So, it's a great question about, like, how can we, I think a lot of way, like, within the family, are great spaces to, especially because a lot of people are, sort of at home right now. But especially in parish communities, maybe it's thinking about, if you have a youth ministry, or thinking about maybe getting families together. Maybe it's, it's not in person, but, checking in with one another. Maybe it's their friends, these 7th and 8th graders or 6th grade, maybe they're checking in with one another, and, and giving them actually projects. Maybe it's this idea of like, well, what can you do to take care, to look at somebody else's need? What can you do to be a neighbor for somebody else, and to kind of work and inspire their curiosity in that way, but to work together in that, and to do these kinds of check-ins. And I think, again, I'm just kind of speaking off the top of my head here, but to do that in the family context, to kind of catalyze that a little bit, again, kind of work within maybe those friendships, and pair up families. But I think, yeah, and that's where, again, I think the family role really, really kind of comes in really nicely, because, again, the middle schoolers, they're kind of, they can't drive, and, things like that. So, but to kind of facilitate those connections. So, yeah, I have a really soft spot in my heart for middle school youth. So I
Yeah.
really appreciate the question.
What a great opportunity for a parent to see their child in a different light, and vice versa, and how that relationship and that connection can grow
Yeah,
through that experience. I'm going to do one more question here.
sure.
Um, there we go. So Adam says that, Scott, in one of your early slides, you talked about potential obstacles to the church for youth and young adult. One
Yeah,
could add polarization within the church, especially seen recently with some arguing who is more or less Catholic. How
yeah.
do young people experience this polarization, and how ministry leaders can accompany their young people despite this polarization?
Yeah, I generally find that, folks are tired, right? Like the kind of the infighting we hear about, some of the things that I see, right, is who is more Catholic, and not really are these are conversations that really, I don't think they set a good example. So I think, again, for young people, I think it's really important to focus on the concrete things. And again, getting back to this idea of mission and service, like, I think this is where the real opportunity is to sort of say, look at all of these people who in different ways are living out, their Catholic faith. Some are doing it in big ways, some are doing it in small ways, but they're all under this umbrella of the faith, and animating the faith. And some of us, and I think it's also important to educate young people, and I'll kind of tie this up here because I know we're at time, but to see that each of us, especially when it comes to comparison, like these kinds of this kind of infighting where we say, well, this person's more Catholic, or like, and we start to criticize, like, we each have different capabilities, right? And I think it's really important to work with young people to sort of, and especially this is kind of really personally, and kind of hearing their stories, and to sort of say, well, you have different capabilities than this other person. This does not make you any better Catholic than them, and kind of really working on that kind of education of the mind and heart, to realize that we all have a role to play in the body of Christ. Different sizes, but all kind of, all working towards, kind of this image, and kind of working toward heaven. So, when these kind of things come out, and they're comparing, and they're like, you're not doing this or that, like, I think that's really damaging to the imagination of a young person, because they start to get that in their minds, and think, well, that's kind of how this goes. And Christ calls us in all different ways. And so to really kind of enforce those things. And again, I think it's by, helping them think about the gifts that they want to live out, and maybe thinking about projects. Like, it helps to get out of these, get away from these other narratives that make it not about the heart of charity, and looking out for our neighbors. So.
And what an amazing opportunity we could have, to lead youth in that way, to focus on the loving your neighbor, and we are, one body but different parts, and the good in all of
Yeah.
that can really
And to
change
let
their
that, yeah,
life.
and to let that lead. I think, like, again, there's the church. I mean, there's a real richness to what we have, but to sort of say, let's let the youth lead us, right, and their optimism, and there's, like, to try and cultivate that, and kind of focus their imagination on those habits, and the building of those virtues, right, so that then, it becomes a little bit easier when we see the things that we need to kind of wrestle with a little bit more. They're not just going to say, well, I'm going to, throw out the baby with the bathwater, right, and just say, well, I don't want to have anything to do with the church, but to build those habits of seeing how connected these really, things like mission and looking out for our neighbor are, so that they know that that's just as much the church that they're a part of, right? As opposed to, a lot of the bad press that we get for that, and to that question, the polarization that we see, so.
Right, absolutely. Well, Scott, we could definitely go on all day and talk to you about this, but our time is up. So I just wanted to remind everybody, I know I got a lot of comments in the question about whether you will get this recording. Yes, you will get this recording. I will send you information and the email. And please know that all of our past webinars can be found at avemariapress.com. Just look for the professional development webinar icon and click on that. All right. And of course, we want to offer you a little bit of a savings here, 25% off your entire order at avemariapress.com. Just use promo code webinar 1208 for today's date. And that is good for the next 10 days when you're ordering at avemariapress.com. And what a great way to end our fall series with you, Scott. I invite all of you to join us this spring. January 12th will be the next webinar, and we're going to learn a little bit about the church in the Middle Ages and how we can dialogue with people about misconceptions that they might hear today among Catholics and non-Catholics. So thank you, everybody. Thank you again, Scott. Everybody have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.